Night had fallen heavily over the hospital, where silence echoed down the empty halls. Clara, a nurse used to the night shifts, walked slowly, observing the stillness around her. But as she passed by Dona Amelia's room, a frail elderly woman with a tired expression, she sensed something different in the air, a whisper so faint it was almost a sigh lost in the darkness. Curious, Clara approached the bed, leaning in to listen more closely. Amelia's voice was barely a fragile thread as she said, "Tell my son that I'm dead." Clara froze, trying to understand what she'd just heard. The woman continued, as if speaking into a vast emptiness. "He doesn't come? He wouldn't even know if I were gone?" Clara felt a pang in her chest. Why would anyone make a request like that? Standing there before this lonely woman, she sensed that the request went far deeper than the words could express. Dona Amelia's unexpected request lingered in Clara's mind. Each time she thought of the woman's words, a restlessness grew within her. During the shift change, when the usual hustle returned to the hospital, Clara took the chance to look further into the mystery of the patient. In the hospital system, Dona Amelia's records were brief and factual, but one detail caught her attention. She'd been admitted weeks ago, and in all that time no one had come to see her. No visits, no calls, no notes. It was as if she'd been forgotten by the world. Her medical file indicated fragile health, but it was the complete absence of any affection around her that weighed heaviest as Clara read. Clara found herself imagining this woman's life. How many dreams, struggles, and sacrifices, and now, here alone with a broken heart and a painful request. With a heavy sigh, she felt a deep empathy, something that urged her to do more, to listen to this woman in a way no one else seemed to have done. That afternoon, Clara decided to do something she usually avoided: cross the invisible line between nurse and patient. She approached Dona Amelia's bed, where the elderly woman stared at the ceiling with a distant look, as if her mind were somewhere far away. Clara pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and gently broke the silence. "Dona Amelia, may I ask about your family?" Clara said in a near whisper, cautious not to intrude too deeply into her private space. The old woman slowly turned her face toward her, and for a moment, her eyes glistened, but they soon filled with a sadness Clara had never seen before. "My son," Dona Amelia began in an almost inaudible tone. "He used to be my joy, you know? I did everything for him. But," she hesitated, holding back the words as if they were thorns. "One day he left without looking back, without caring. To him I became a burden." Clara felt a sharp ache in her chest as she heard this. Sitting there, understanding the depth of that pain, she saw Dona Amelia not as an anonymous patient in a hospital bed, but as a woman who, after a lifetime of love and dedication, now found herself abandoned and invisible. Clara's heart tightened with a new resolve. Perhaps Dona Amelia had been forgotten by many, but she wouldn't let the dignity of this woman be forgotten too. That night, as Clara reviewed reports and monitored the quiet halls, thoughts of Dona Amelia would not let her rest. The elderly woman's confession still echoed in her mind, filled with a profound sorrow that Clara couldn't ignore. Each time the woman's face came to mind, a dilemma arose with it. Clara knew the son's name, it was there in the records. She knew she could find him, but should she? Clara looked at the phone at the nurse's station, feeling the weight of a difficult choice. The image of Dona Amelia, alone, vulnerable, without hope of reconciliation, pressed heavily on her heart. At the same time, the hospital rules came to mind, clear and direct. Contacting family members without permission was a violation, and she knew the possible consequences. What would it cost her to do this? Clara took a deep breath, trying to convince herself that she was just a nurse and that maybe this was Dona Amelia's decision too. Maybe the elderly woman didn't want contact. And even if she did, would it be right to interfere with a decision her son had already made? But then the memory of Dona Amelia's gaze returned, that weary voice simply asking for dignity and a little peace. The moral dilemma weighed more heavily on Clara each day. Whom should she listen to? The voice of duty telling her to stay within her role, or the voice of empathy, urging her to do something, anything to bring a sliver of peace to a woman who felt invisible? In the quiet of her shift, Clara wondered if there was a right answer. As days went by, Clara and Dona Amelia seemed to build a silent, deep bond. Every night, as Clara entered the room, she brought a little bit of her special attention. Sometimes it was a flower from the hospital garden, which she left by Dona Amelia's bedside. Other times, just a gentle touch, a look, a smile. Simple gestures, but they lit up the elderly woman's tired face with an almost childlike gratitude. Dona Amelia began to open up, confiding stories of her life before ending up there alone. She spoke, with a lost sparkle in her eyes, about sleepless nights when her son was young, the long hours she worked so he would never go without, and the silent sacrifices she made to ensure he had opportunities. She spoke of her pride in watching him grow, even if, in the end, that growth had taken them both far apart. Clara listened quietly, her heart growing heavier with each revelation. The elderly woman seemed to have an inner strength, a resilience that had kept her going despite years of neglect, but her voice, breaking with emotion, revealed wounds no one else could see. In her trembling gestures and her long stares into the void, Clara saw a lifetime of love and sacrifice that now seemed discarded. That pain, that loneliness, seeped into Clara in a way she could no longer ignore. Deep down, Clara knew. Dona Amélia wasn't asking for forgiveness for her son or for any mistake, because she had nothing to forgive. The only plea left was simple, almost a silent prayer, that somehow her love had not been in vain. That night, after deeply considering Dona Amélia's unspoken plea and the growing weight it put on her, Clara decided it was time to try something. She walked down the hall with a restlessness in her chest, feeling the responsibility to give this woman, somehow, a chance for redemption, a tiny reconnection. With a heavy heart, she found the phone number of Dona Amélia's son in her medical records and, no longer hesitating, dialed it. The line rang a few times, and Clara almost had a moment to expect a different reaction, to imagine he'd answer with at least a trace of concern, or maybe even some urgency when hearing his mother's name. But when he finally picked up, his voice was cold, devoid of any familiarity. Clara, keeping her tone as calm and professional as possible, introduced herself, explaining who she was and gently mentioned Dona Amélia's condition. But before she could finish her sentence, there was a detached pause on the other end. Then, with a weary sigh, almost annoyed, he replied, "I said everything I needed to say to her years ago," with a cruel firmness, leaving no room for conversation. Before Clara could even try to insist, the line went silent, the abrupt hang-up replaced by a hollow finality. She stood there, holding the phone, absorbing the emptiness of that response. The weight of his indifference seemed almost tangible in the room with her. She felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. How could someone close their heart so completely, so indifferently, without a hint of compassion for the person who raised them? Returning to Dona Amélia's room, Clara's emotions were tangled. She looked at the elderly woman, asleep, her face peaceful but marked by the years, and she promised herself that even if her son had abandoned his role, she would not let Dona Amélia go through this without a final ounce of humanity. She would be there, steadfast, offering what was missing: respect, dignity, and, above all, the presence of someone who refused to give in to abandonment. In the days that followed, Clara couldn't get her last conversation with Dona Amélia's son out of her mind. The coldness of his response kept echoing, but looking at the frail elderly woman, something within her pleaded for a solution. Amélia deserved to feel at peace, even if that peace was built on a small illusion. Then, in the quiet of a late night, Clara had a bold idea, perhaps the only one that could bring comfort to someone so alone. Clara began writing a letter as if it were from Dona Amélia's son. She took a blank sheet of paper and, with delicate handwriting, wrote words of affection and regret. In the letter, the son expressed how he missed her, apologized for past mistakes, and promised to visit soon. She used gentle words, the kind Clara imagined Dona Amélia had longed to hear. When morning came, Clara handed the letter to the elderly woman, feeling apprehensive. But when she saw Dona Amélia's eyes light up as she recognized her son's handwriting, she knew she had made the right choice. Dona Amélia, emotional, began to read the letter aloud, pausing at times to hold back tears. "My son, he remembered me," she murmured, clutching the paper with trembling hands. Clara watched, moved, realizing that this small act of compassion had managed to bring the missing piece. In the days that followed, Clara continued to write letters as if they were messages from the son. Each letter contained a memory from his childhood, an apology, or a happy recollection. Dona Amélia began to treasure these letters, rereading them every night. With each new message, she was filled with a tranquility she hadn't known in a long time. For Clara, it was a fictional solace, a hope sustained by words she knew weren't real. But seeing Dona Amélia sleep with a gentle smile, a serene expression, Clara understood that sometimes truth gives way to love, and that it was possible, even through a simple piece of paper, to offer someone the comfort of feeling loved, even if it was through an illusion. As days passed, Dona Amélia's condition began to worsen. Her body showed signs of fatigue, and Clara felt time slipping away, like a fragile thread about to snap. Watching the elderly woman's silent suffering, she decided she wouldn't distance herself, not now. She started visiting Dona Amélia often, staying by her side, bringing breakfast or simply being a comforting presence during nights when the pain was hardest. Dona Amélia noticed the change, and with each look she thanked Clara with a touching serenity. One of those nights, as Clara held her hand, Amelia sighed deeply and looked at the ceiling. With a trembling, soft voice she said, "I feel my time is coming, dear, but I couldn't be more at peace." Clara squeezed her hand in response, holding back her emotions and whispering words of comfort. Between pauses and sighs, Dona Amélia began reflecting on the presence of her son through the letters. "It was such a relief that he remembered me. I don't know how I would have endured these days without it." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, silently accepting the role she had chosen to bring some comfort to this lonely soul. In those final days, the two shared simple moments, full of unspoken words and gestures that spoke for themselves. Clara felt connected to Dona Amélia in an indescribable way, a connection that went beyond mere professional duty. In those last moments, there was a deep sense of gratitude, for having found each other, even under painful circumstances, and for being able to share a friendship that was silent and true. The last night came quietly, wrapped in the distant hum of monitors and the soft glow of hallway lights. Clara felt this was a special moment, something urging her to stay by Dona Amelia's side, as if that room held an imminent goodbye. Amelia was awake, her eyes fixed on the window, where moonlight illuminated the room's darkness. When she sensed Clara's presence, she smiled with a warmth overflowing with gratitude. With a gentle effort, she reached out a trembling hand toward the nurse, who immediately came closer and held it firmly, feeling the ever more fragile warmth of this woman who had touched her heart so deeply. "Clara, you brought light to my final days," Amelia whispered, her voice choked, her eyes shining with emotion and gratitude. "Thank you, for everything." Clara, struggling to control the lump in her throat, nodded quietly, with a smile that masked the sadness of watching that precious life slip away. The two remained in silence, hands entwined, as Clara felt the grip slowly weaken. Amelia closed her eyes, appearing at peace, her expression serene, as if she had finally found the comfort she had long sought. There, in the calm of that final exchange of looks and gestures, Dona Amélia passed away, leaving an emptiness in Clara but also a feeling of a mission fulfilled. Clara stayed by her side for a few more moments, letting silent tears finally fall. In that room, an invisible promise lingered, that Dona Amélia would not be forgotten and that the love and comfort Clara had offered would be remembered forever. The next morning, as sunlight began to fill the hospital, Clara walked through the corridors with a hollow feeling she had never known before. Amelia's absence felt so present that, for a moment, Clara found herself almost expecting to see her while passing by the room. Yet she knew that the silence now represented the peace Amelia had finally found. She sat in a break room, looking out the window as the first rays of sun glimmered. "What does it mean to be family?" she pondered quietly. Until then she had thought her job was only to care for the physical health of her patients, but her connection with Amelia had shown her that sometimes what heals most isn't medicine or technique. It's the connection, the listening, the small acts of humanity that can transform a person's final moments. The experience awakened something deep in Clara, something that made her question the relationships in her own life. The dedication and care she had given Amelia, almost as if she were her own mother, planted in her a new motivation to go beyond technical care. This experience was now a silent promise to treat each patient as someone who deserves not just care but dignity and respect. And so, with the sun lighting up the city, Clara found the strength to stand. She had learned that somewhere, there is always a hand that needs holding, a heart that needs comfort. And that with small gestures she could make more of a difference than she had ever imagined. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought of this story and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.